Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins.
The moon hung low over Ithilien, a pale coin of silver veiled by drifting smoke from distant fires. The air smelled of ash and fear. War had rolled through the green country like a devouring tide, leaving behind only broken branches, trampled grass, and the uneasy silence of hunted men. Among the trees moved a lone figure, limping, bloodied, but unbowed. Hirgun of Gondor, once captain of a ranger company, now the last of his band, pressed on through the night. His bow was broken, his sword chipped, and his cloak torn to ribbons by brambles and battle. Each step burned like fire, yet still he went on, for the sound of orc horns haunted the wind behind him. He had fled from the ruins of a small outpost 2 nights past, where orcs of Mordor had struck without warning. His comrades had fallen one by one, ambushed among the stones. He had seen his friend Belthor dragged into the dark, screaming. He had sworn he would return to Gondor with word of what he had seen, that the enemy was not retreating as the captains believed, but regrouping in the woods, gathering for another strike upon the White City. But now his strength waned. Blood seeped through a bandage on his thigh, and fever clouded his thoughts. When he stumbled at last into a clearing, he fell to his knees, gasping, ready to yield to the night. Yet it was not death that greeted him there. It was a sound unlike any he had heard before. It was the low, shuddering cry of a great bird in pain. Hirgun froze. His weary eyes scanned the shadows until he saw it. A vast shape lying at the base of an ancient oak, wings spread wide as sails. Black feathers glimmered like onyx in the moonlight, pierced by several black-shafted arrows. The creature's golden eyes gleamed with fury and fear. An eagle, but larger than any mortal bird. Its wings, even folded, stretched farther than a horse's length. Its talons were the size of a man's hands, curved and deadly. The beast struggled weakly, bound by a net of coarse rope and iron spikes. Orc work, without doubt. They had sought to capture it, perhaps for sport, or to feed it to their beasts. Hirgun's first thought was to flee. Even wounded, such a creature could crush him with a single strike. But the sight of those arrows, black-fletched and cruel, stirred something fierce within him. The same malice that had taken his men now tormented this proud being. He spoke softly, his voice hoarse. "Peace, Great One, I am no foe of yours." The eagle fixed him with a burning gaze. Its beak opened slightly, but no sound came. Only the slow, rattling breath of exhaustion. Moving with care, Hirgun cut one of the ropes. The eagle jerked, and its talons slashed the air just shy of his arm. But he did not draw back. He worked quickly, cutting another and another. When the last cord fell away, the creature let out a low, thunderous cry that rolled through the forest like distant thunder. The sound carried, and far off, an answering horn rose in the dark. The orcs had heard. Hirgun turned sharply. The drums began to throb, the dreadful hollow beat that echoed through the woods like the pulse of the land itself. They were coming. He looked to the eagle. "Fly if you can. I will draw them away." But the great bird did not move. One of its wings hung limp, broken at the joint. Instead, it turned its gaze upon him, then upon the forest beyond, as though measuring the threat. Its feathers trembled. Hirgun lifted his sword. The blade was dull, but it would have to serve. Then we fight together, you and I. The first orcs burst from the trees, snarling, stinking, their eyes burning red in the gloom. Hirgon struck down the foremost, parried another's blade, and drove his knee into its gut. Blood sprayed across the moss. A javelin whistled past his ear. Behind him the eagle roared, a sound so mighty it seemed to shake the very leaves from the trees. It surged up, half flying, half leaping, its talons sweeping through the dark. 2 orcs were snatched up and flung aside like broken dolls. The clearing erupted into chaos. Arrows hissed, steel rang. Hirgon fought beside the beast, ducking beneath its wings, striking where its shadow fell. For a moment it seemed the tide might turn. But then, a spear struck deep into the eagle's side. It screamed, twisting violently. Hirgon flung himself forward, driving his blade into the orc that had thrown it. The creature fell, gurgling. He turned and saw the eagle, bleeding, staggering toward the edge of the clearing. "Go!" he shouted. "Go before they come again!" The eagle spread its wings. With a cry that split the night, it leapt, and though one wing faltered, the other caught the wind. For a heartbeat, it rose above the trees, black against the moon. Then it vanished into the mist beyond. The drums faded. The clearing fell silent, save for the crackle of torches. Hirgon sank to his knees, his sword buried in the earth. He thought the eagle gone forever. But far above, hidden by cloud and moon, the dark shape still flew, weakly but alive, and in its golden eyes burned a promise. Vengeance would come on swift wings. Dawn came slowly to Ithilien. Mist drifted among the trees like ghostly banners, softening the scars of battle. Hirgon awoke beside the embers of a dying fire, his body stiff and sore, his wounds bound with what little cloth he could spare. His sword lay beside him, its edge nicked and stained, and his thoughts were heavy with loss. The eagle, Shadowclaw, he had begun to call it in his mind, was gone, carried away on a broken wind. Yet still, somewhere in the depths of the forest, he thought he heard the faint echo of wings. The ranger's duty called him south, toward the Anduin and the hidden ways that led back to Gondor, but his heart could not leave Ithilien so easily. The enemy was gathering. The orcs he had faced were only the first shadow of a greater host. And somewhere out there, that wounded eagle still lived, hunted by the same darkness. He rose, took what strength remained, and set out again under the dim gold of morning. For 2 days he moved through the woods like a ghost, avoiding orc patrols, crossing streams to hide his trail, and resting only when his body demanded it. He saw their signs everywhere: trampled ground, the black smoke of cook fires, and the cruel remains of what they had taken. Once, in a glade where sunlight pierced the canopy, he found feathers, vast, dark, and gleaming like polished steel. The eagle's trail. Blood marked the grass nearby. He followed. It led him through narrow gullies and over mossy stones until he came to a gorge, deep and echoing. There, amid the roots of an ancient oak, he found Shadowclaw again. The great eagle was barely breathing. One wing hung at an unnatural angle, and its side bore the wound of a spear, already gone black at the edges. When Hirgon approached, the golden eyes flickered open, fierce even in pain. "Peace," he murmured, setting aside his sword. "I am no enemy." The eagle's gaze lingered on him. Then, with a shuddering sigh, it lowered its head to the earth. Hirgon worked through the day and into the night. He cleaned the wound with river water, drew out the broken spearhead with the point of his knife and packed the gash with crushed herbs he had learned to use from the healers of Ithilien. When it was done, he built a small shelter of branches and kindled a smokeless fire to keep the cold away. The eagle did not move, save to breathe, but when Hirgon offered it a strip of dried venison, it accepted, snapping the meat with its beak before swallowing whole. For many days, the man and the eagle remained there, hidden from the eyes of the enemy. Hirgon hunted small game and tended his strange companion. Sometimes, in the long silences between the sighing of wind and water, he spoke to it, not as to a beast, but as one might to an equal. He told of the white city gleaming on the hill, of the steward's hall, of the courage of Gondor's sons who yet held the walls against the darkness. "You are far from your kin," he said one night. "Do the eagles still dwell beyond the mountains?" The bird lifted its head, and for a moment Hirgon thought he glimpsed understanding in its gaze. Then came a low, rumbling cry, not of pain but memory. The sound carried, strange and deep, and it seemed to Hirgon that the stars themselves trembled at it. "Shadowclaw," he whispered, "that shall be your name." Time passed, the forest changed. Leaves turned from green to bronze as autumn crept over Ithilien, and still they lingered in the gorge. Shadowclaw's wounds began to mend, though his wing bore a heavy scar. At last one morning he stood upon the ledge above their camp, spread his wings, and rose into the wind. The sight filled Hirgon with both joy and dread, for he knew what such flight meant. The call of vengeance had awakened. That same evening, far to the east, the Orcs gathered once more. Their captains, cruel and restless, spoke of a black eagle that had slain their scouts and carried them screaming into the clouds. They swore oaths of revenge, and word was sent to the fortress of Minas Morgul, where the shadow of the Nazgul still lingered. There, a messenger mounted upon a fell beast took wing, his task clear, to hunt and destroy the creature that defied Mordor. But Shadowclaw was no easy prey. From the peaks of the Efelduath to the riverlands of Anduin, he struck without warning, diving upon marching columns, scattering warg riders and tearing banners from their poles. Hirgon followed where he could, guiding small bands of rangers to strike when the Orcs were weakest. Together, man and eagle wove fear into the hearts of the enemy. The Orcs named the bird Morgoth's Bane, and would not march under open sky if they could help it. Once, near the ruins of Osgiliath, Hirgon watched from a ridge as Shadowclaw descended upon a company of Orcs escorting siege trolls. The eagle's cry was like thunder. He struck with talons gleaming like iron, tore through chains and armor, and sent the beasts into madness. The Orcs fled in panic, trampling each other as the eagle rose again, wings darkened by smoke and blood. When Hirgon found him afterward resting on a broken tower, the eagle's feathers were scorched, his eyes burning bright in the dusk. The ranger stood before him in awe. "You've killed more Orcs than an army of men," he said quietly. Shadowclaw only turned his head toward the east, where the red glare of Mordor still burned. For all their triumphs, doom was not idle. The fell beast came at last under moonless skies, its wings vast as storm clouds. It found them near the dead marshes, where Shadowclaw had gone to strike a Mordor convoy. The air turned foul with its approach. The stench of rot and iron filled Hirgon's lungs. The Nazgul's voice echoed through the night, cold, deathly, full of hate. "Creature of the mountains," it hissed, "you shall fall, and your bones shall feed the dark." Shadowclaw's answer was a scream of defiance that split the heavens. He rose, talons flashing, and the two met in midair. The clash shook the night, beak against claw, feather against scale. Below, the orcs scattered as burning fragments rained from the sky. Hirgon loosed arrow after arrow, striking at the fell beast's wings. One shaft found its mark, piercing the membrane. The creature shrieked, twisting in pain. In that instant, Shadowclaw seized it by the throat and drove it downward through fire and shadow, into the marsh below. When the smoke cleared, the fell beast was no more. Shadowclaw stood triumphant, though his feathers dripped black blood and his breathing came hard. Hirgon ran to him, but the eagle merely bowed its head once, acknowledgement farewell, and rose again into the wind. From that day forth, the orcs of Mordor never dared to march through Ithilien unguarded. They whispered that a deathly eagle haunted the skies, and that even in daylight his shadow brought doom. And somewhere in the high peaks above the world, Shadowclaw circled alone, scarred but unbroken, his eyes turned always toward the east, where evil still festered. Winter descended upon Ithilien like a slow and silent siege. Frost crept along the boughs of the great oaks, and the once green forests became pale with sleep. The rivers ran thin and cold, their voices whispering faintly under veils of ice. Yet in that season of stillness, war did not rest. From the east came tidings of new orc hosts crossing the Black Gate. Sauron's captains had sworn vengeance for the ruin wrought by the deathly eagle. They gathered their scattered legions, binding them with fear and lash, and sent them again into the borderlands to burn what green life yet endured. But above them, unseen in the pale skies, Shadowclaw hunted still. He had retreated for a time to the high reaches of the Efelduath, to the cold places where the wind howled like wolves, and even the stones remembered sorrow. There, beneath the stars, he had healed, though scars marred his wings, and the ache of the spear's wound never left him. He had known pain, and from that pain, purpose had grown. No longer was he merely a wild creature of the mountains. The blood of Thorondor ran fierce within him, and the fire of wrath that once burned against Morgoth now kindled anew against his servant, Sauron. Each dawn, when the first light touched the snows, Shadowclaw rose from his eyrie and spread his wings. He soared far across the broken lands, his eyes keen as flame. He hunted not for prey of flesh, but of shadow, for every orc, every banner of the eye that dared to defile the west. His talons had grown sharp again, and his heart was hard as the peaks he called home. In the lowlands, Hirgon and the rangers of Ithilien had become legends of their own. The men whispered of a great eagle that fought beside them, descending from the clouds to strike when all hope seemed lost. Yet few had seen him up close. To them, he was a phantom of the Valar, a sign that the West had not been forgotten. But Hirgon knew better. He alone had looked into those golden eyes and seen both fury and sorrow. He knew the eagle was flesh and blood, bound to this world by the same grief that drove all who fought the shadow. Through long months, he ranged the forests, gathering scattered men, guiding them through secret paths, and striking where the enemy's hold was weakest. Shadowclaw was never far. At times Hirgon would glimpse a dark speck wheeling high above the clouds, a guardian, silent and watchful. It was in those days that a rumor began to spread among the orcs. They said the eagle bore the souls of slain men within his wings, that his cry could summon storms, and that no arrow could pierce his hide. Fear spread faster than truth ever could, and many deserted their posts rather than face him. Yet fear breeds cunning as well as cowardice. One night, beneath the shadow of the Morannon, a new commander came among them, a black captain, cloaked and silent, his helm wrought in the shape of a serpent. He listened to their trembling tales, and his laughter chilled even the hardened orcs to the bone. "If this bird be death," he said, "then let him taste death in turn. We shall snare the wind itself." And so a trap was laid. For days the orcs moved through Ithilien, cutting down trees, leaving false tracks, and spreading carrion across the hills. To lure the eagle, they feigned retreat, scatter in small bands through the forest, while a greater host waited in the ravines. Nets of chain and barbed rope stretched across the open sky between the cliffs. When the bait was set, the black captain waited. High above, Shadowclaw watched their movements. He saw the fires burning low and the banners drawn down, as if the host were in flight. His keen eyes marked the trail of wounded beasts, the scattered bodies of orcs left as if slain in haste. Rage flared in him, for he thought the enemy routed, fleeing once again toward Mordor. With a cry that rolled across the valley, he stooped from the clouds. The wind roared in his feathers. The earth rushed to meet him. He struck the foremost company like a storm. Orcs were lifted from the ground and cast aside, shields shattered beneath his talons. His beak tore through iron helms as if they were clay. He wheeled and struck again, his wings beating thunder through the mist. Then came the sound of chains. From the cliffs above, the nets fell, woven with hooks and weighted with stones. They wrapped around his wings, dragging him down. He fought, but the chains bit deep, tearing feathers and flesh alike. The ground rose to meet him in a crash that shook the gorge. The orcs swarmed in, shouting in triumph. Shadowclaw's screams split the air. He tore free one chain, then another, slashing and snapping, but there were too many. Spears pierced his sides. Blood black as wine streamed down his flanks. He struck one orc full in the chest and sent it flying into the rocks. Another he crushed beneath his talon, but more poured in, driving iron hooks into his flesh. Then from the shadows at the gorge's mouth a horn rang, a clear, bright note that cut through the clamor like a sword through smoke. Hirgun had come. The rangers of Ithilien charged from the woods, their blades gleaming, their cries fierce and desperate. Arrows hissed, orcs fell, the gorge erupted into battle. Hirgun himself reached Shadowclaw's side, cutting at the chains that bound the eagle's wings. "Fly!" he shouted. "Fly, great one. The wind still calls you." The eagle turned its golden eyes upon him, and for a heartbeat, man and bird stood together amid the storm of battle, two creatures bound by fate, neither willing to yield. Then, with a cry that seemed to tear the very sky, Shadowclaw spread his wings. Iron links burst apart like sparks. He rose, blood trailing behind him like banners of flame. His talons seized the black captain's horse, lifting both rider and beast into the air. The wraith shrieked, drawing a black blade that burned with pale fire. Shadowclaw struck once, beak meeting steel, and the weapon shattered. Then he hurled the wraith from the heights into the abyss below, where neither wind nor light could follow. When the last echo faded, silence fell over the gorge. The orcs fled. Those who remained were slain or scattered. The rangers stood awed beneath the dim sky, watching as the eagle climbed once more into the clouds. Hirgun sank to one knee, exhausted, his sword red with battle. He looked up, and in that moment he knew that whatever songs might one day be sung of this war, few would speak of him. But they would remember the eagle, the dark shape that haunted the skies, the winged fury that broke Mordor's strength. For Shadowclaw had become more than a creature of flesh. He was legend now, a symbol of wrath and hope, a whisper on the wind that no darkness could silence. And though his wings were torn and his blood fell upon the snow, still he soared eastward into the heart of the storm, seeking the shadow that had begun all things, for vengeance was not yet complete. The wind from the east carried no scent of life. It came bitter and dry across the ash plains, whispering of ruin and dust. Far beyond the mountains of shadow, the black land of Mordor seethed beneath a sky without dawn. Smoke rolled ceaselessly from Mount Doom's fiery maw, and red light flickered like the pulse of some vast, sleeping beast. Into that realm of death flew Shadowclaw. His wings were torn, his feathers scorched, but still he flew. The pain was fire beneath his skin, yet his heart beat strong and wrathful. Below him stretched the barren wastes of Gorgoroth, endless, cracked, and steaming. Great furnaces belched smoke, and in the distance he could see the towers of Barad-dûr piercing the sky like black fangs. The eye of Sauron burned between them, searching, unblinking. Hirgon had begged him not to go. The rangers had tended his wounds after the battle at the gorge, and for a time the eagle had rested in the shadow of the White Mountains, but Shadowclaw's gaze had never turned westward. His spirit was restless, chained by a single purpose. The enemy still breathed, and until that breath was ended, he would know no peace. One cold dawn, without a sound, he had taken wing and vanished toward the east. The rangers watched him fade into the rising light, and Hirgon had bowed his head in silence. He knew this was a journey from which few returned. Now over the plains of Mordor, the eagle's shadow passed like a ghost. The orcs who glimpsed it below fled, shrieking, for they knew that form too well, the wings of death that had shattered their hosts in Ithilien. Many loosed arrows skyward, but none found their mark. Shadowclaw moved swift as the wind and silent as nightfall. He followed the trail of the fell beast he had slain, for rumor had reached him through whispers of the wild, spoken by ravens and foxes alike, that another of those cursed creatures still roamed, ridden by a black captain mightier than the rest. It was said this wraith commanded the skies of Mordor itself, keeping all lesser creatures in terror beneath his flight. Shadowclaw would find him. Days passed in silence. The land below was endless desolation. Rivers of molten rock crawled through ravines, and the smell of sulfur stung the air. Once he passed above the shattered ruins of Narshost and Karshost, the towers of the Teeth, now abandoned by the Orcs who had fled west to war. His wings cast long shadows across them, and for the first time he wondered whether vengeance could truly heal what had been broken. But the thought passed like wind through feathers. The memory of the chains and the spears burned too deep. At last, beneath the dark of a moonless night, he found what he sought. The fell beast rose from the depths of the plateau of Gorgoroth, a shape vast and hideous, its leathern wings beating clouds of ash into storm. Its rider was cloaked in black, crowned with iron, and his face was a void that drank all light. When he spoke, his voice was like the grinding of stone. "So you come again, servant of the West," the Nazgul said, lifting a blade wreathed in shadow. "Did your kin not fall to dust in the first age? I shall finish what Morgoth began." Shadowclaw's cry answered him, wild, terrible, filled with every death he had ever seen. The two shapes wheeled through the air, black against black, their outlines limned in red fire from the mountain. Then, with the swiftness of a striking hawk, Shadowclaw descended. The clash shook the air like thunder. Talon met claw, beak met blade. The fell beast shrieked, lashing its barbed tail. Shadowclaw struck it across the snout, tearing scales loose, but the Nazgul's sword swept through his wing, and blood rained down in burning drops. They circled higher and higher through smoke and lightning until they fought amid the very vapors of Mount Doom. Below, the fires raged louder. Sauron's forges glowed like 1,000 eyes. Sparks of molten stone flew upward, stinging Shadowclaw's flesh. He drove downward, striking the fell beast's back, and his talons found purchase in the wraith's armor. He hurled them both into a spinning fall. The Nazgul's scream echoed across the plains. But before they struck the ground, a great wind burst from Barad-dûr itself, a force not born of air, but of will. It caught Shadowclaw and flung him aside, sending him crashing into the jagged spires of an obsidian ridge. The fell beast righted itself, wings beating like drums of war. The Nazgul raised his blade, and lightning forked from it, white and cold. "You shall not unmake what the Dark Lord has forged," he cried. "No feathered beast shall fly free above his realm." Shadowclaw rose from the stones, his left wing torn, his breath coming in harsh gasps. Yet he did not yield. The spirit of Thorondor burned within him, proud and unbroken. He gathered the storm around him, catching the rising wind. Then he spoke, not in words as men speak, but in the ancient tongue of the Sky Lords, a sound that rolled like thunder and made the mountain tremble. And he struck. With the fury of the storm itself, he drove upward into the heart of the cloud, turned and dove. His beak caught the wraith's sword arm, shattering bone and shadow alike. His talons pierced the fell beast's breast, tearing through scale and sinew. The creature screamed, flailing in agony. Together they plunged toward the mountain's fiery mouth. For an instant, all the land of Mordor seemed to hold its breath. The eye of Sauron flared, burning red and vast. Then the two fell into the fire. The mountain erupted in a pillar of flame. The force of it hurled Shadowclaw skyward again. Wings torn, body broken, he rose on the blast like an arrow of light, trailing sparks behind him. The fell beast was gone, consumed utterly, but the wraith's voice still lingered, a whisper of hate that clung to the wind. Shadowclaw beat his wings once, twice, and soared beyond the reach of the flames. His feathers smoked, his eyes burned bright as molten gold. Far below, the plains rippled with shock and fear. The orcs threw down their arms and fled, crying that the mountain itself had risen against them. For hours he flew west, the fires of Mordor fading behind. When at last the dawn broke, a pale, enshrouded dawn, it fell upon his bloodied wings, and for the first time in long months, the shadow of Sauron's land did not reach him. He flew until he saw the silver ribbon of the Anduin glinting far below, and there his strength failed. He descended slowly, each wing beat weaker than the last, until he came to rest upon a crag overlooking Ithilien. The trees whispered beneath him, their leaves trembling as if in awe. He folded his wings and bowed his head. In that stillness he felt the presence of another. Hirgon stood at the base of the cliff, his cloak torn and his sword sheathed. He had known the eagle would return. He had waited day after day, watching the skies. "You did it, didn't you?" he said softly. I can feel it. The wind smells cleaner. Shadowclaw's gaze met his. No words passed between them, but none were needed. The Eagle of Death, the Avenger of Ithilien, had done what no host of men could. He had broken the power of Mordor's sky. As the sun rose, its light caught upon a single feather that fell from his wing, black at the tip but gleaming white at its heart. Hirgon picked it up and pressed it to his breast. When he looked again, Shadowclaw was gone, climbing into the morning light, toward the white peaks of the world. And though the war was not yet ended, all who fought that day would remember the cry that echoed over Ithilien, the cry of an eagle who had flown through fire and shadow and come out unbowed, the cry of Shadowclaw, the deathly eagle. Snow still clung to the high passes of the White Mountains when word of the deathly eagle's deeds reached the courts of Gondor. Riders came from the borders, their cloaks torn by wind, bearing tales that the skies above Mordor had burst into fire and that the hosts of the enemy were in chaos. Many thought it a dream born of weariness or a trick of the rising sun, but others whispered the truth, that a single eagle, black-feathered and terrible to behold, had battled the servants of Sauron and lived. In Minas Tirith, the steward's men wrote these reports carefully, though few believed them fully. Yet among the rangers of Ithilien, belief was not needed. They had seen the dark wings sweep across the forest, had heard the cry that sent orcs scattering like leaves before a gale. They had fought beside the creature and lived to tell of it. Shadowclaw was no rumor to them. He was the breath of vengeance made flesh. As the snows melted and spring returned, the war grew fierce again. The enemy's strength, though wounded, was far from broken. Orcs poured once more from the east, drawn by the will of the Dark Lord, who even now marshaled his might for one final strike against the west. Yet something had changed in the hearts of men. The despair that had shadowed them since Osgiliath's fall had begun to wane, replaced by a new courage that even they could not explain. At dusk, when the fires burned low, they would speak softly of the eagle, the one who had flown through the fire of the mountain and survived. They said his cry still echoed above Mordor, that his wings blotted out the eye itself, that he had become the herald of the storm to come. Some swore they saw him by moonlight, circling high above the Anduin, a black shape outlined by starlight. Others claimed to have found his feathers in the grass, long and shining like polished steel. Hirgon alone knew how much of this was truth. He alone had spoken to the creature, had tended his wounds, and seen the fire that burned in those golden eyes. But he did not speak of it to others. To him, Shadowclaw was not a symbol or a sign from the valor. He was a friend, a creature of this world, bound to it by the same pain that haunted all who had lost something to the darkness. Now the ranger wandered the borderlands once more, guiding small bands through the ravaged forests. His beard had grown long, and his eyes had taken the distant look of those who have seen too much war. Yet there was strength in him still, and every time the wind swept down from the mountains, he found himself listening, half hoping to hear the beat of wings. One night, as he kept watch near the ruins of Caer Andros, he heard that sound again, not the sigh of wind, but the slow, deliberate rhythm of flight. He looked up, and there it was, a dark shape gliding across the moon, silent and immense. For a moment, the clouds parted, and the starlight caught on the eagle's feathers. Though the light was faint, Hirgon saw that the bird bore scars, jagged lines across its wings like lightning frozen in black stone, yet he flew strong and steady. Hirgon rose to his feet, awe and joy warring within him. "Shadow Claw," he breathed, "you live." The eagle did not descend. Instead, he circled once above the ruined isle, then turned his gaze eastward. His cry rang out, low, haunting, and filled with warning. Hirgon understood. The war was not done. Something was stirring again in the dark. The following days brought grim tidings. Scouts reported that Mordor's armies had begun to move, gathering upon the plains beyond the Morannon. Thousands of orcs marched beneath black banners flanked by wargs and trolls. The air grew heavy with smoke. The final blow was coming. The captains of Gondor called for all men who could bear arms to gather at the Pelennor. The horns of the city sounded, echoing against the mountain walls. Even in Ithilien their call was heard, and Hirgon turned his face westward. Yet before he left the border, he paused upon a high ridge and looked once more toward the Ephel Duoth. There, against the reddened sky, he saw the eagle again. Shadowclaw wheeled above the peaks, a dark fire against the dawn, and Hirgon thought, though it might have been only fancy, that the great bird dipped its wings in farewell before vanishing into the light. The Battle of the Pelennor would be remembered in song and story for ages beyond count, and though many names would be carved into the memory of Gondor, few would speak of the shadow that moved above the smoke that day. Yet those who fought upon the walls swore they saw it, a black eagle soaring amidst the storm of battle, striking at the fell beasts that carried the Nazgul. Each time his cry sounded, men found their courage renewed, and the servants of the Dark Lord faltered. It was said that one of the winged wraiths turned in flight, pursued by the eagle far beyond the walls of the city, never to return. No man could say for certain, for few could look upon such things and live to tell of them. But when the battle ended and the field lay strewn with ruin, a single feather was found among the slain, a great plume, black as the night sea, yet shining faintly at the heart. The healers of Minas Tirith brought it to the steward's hall. Some thought it an omen, others a blessing. But when Hirgon at last returned to the city, weary and blood-stained, he took the feather and held it long in silence. Then, without a word, he carried it to the court of the White Tree. The tree was still dead in those days, its branches pale and lifeless against the sky. Hirgon knelt beneath it and pressed the feather into the earth at its roots. "This is for the one who guarded the sky when none else could," he said quietly. "May your spirit find rest above the mountains." And though no wind stirred that night, the leaves of the tree shivered faintly, as if stirred by a breath unseen. When dawn broke, the first light touched the citadel, gilding the towers in pale gold. A lone cry echoed from the mountains then, high and distant. The guards upon the walls looked up, shielding their eyes, and one pointed toward the east. Far above the city, a shape glided across the morning sky, vast and dark, but radiant where the sun struck its wings. It did not linger. With a final sweep of its pinions, it turned toward the high snows of the north and was gone. From that day onward, no orc or servant of the shadow was ever again seen in Ithilien's skies. The land healed slowly. Green returned to the hills, and the streams ran clear once more. But when the wind rose in spring, the people would pause their work and lift their faces to the sky, listening to the sigh of the air through the leaves. For some said it was not the wind at all, but the spirit of Shadowclaw, still passing overhead, watching, guarding, waiting, and on quiet nights, when the moon hung low and the stars burned bright above the mountains, there were those who claimed to see a shadow, wheeling among them, a great eagle of black and silver, keeping its eternal vigil over the lands it had saved. Thus ended the tale of Shadow Claw, the deathly eagle whose wings burned against the darkness and whose cry gave hope to the hearts of men. And though time would pass and the memory of war fade into song, his name would linger still, carried on the wind of every dawn that broke over Middle Earth. Long years passed after the War of the Ring, and the world of men entered into its age of renewal. Yet even as new towers rose and the scars of battle faded, old songs were still sung beneath the stars. Songs of the great deeds that had preserved the West. Among them was one often whispered by the firelight, when the moon hung high and silver, the lay of Shadow Claw, the deathly eagle who burned the skies of Mordor. Many thought it but a legend, shaped by the fancy of soldiers to give courage in dark times. But among the rangers of Ithilien, the story was told with solemn truth, and each man who had served beneath the command of Hurgon swore by his life that he had seen the great bird with his own eyes. For Hurgon himself lived still, though the years had lined his face and silvered his hair. He dwelt now in Emin Arnon, where the Prince Faramir ruled with the Lady Éowyn. The forest around their halls had grown fair again. Deer walked the meadows, and nightingales sang where once orcs had kindled fires. Yet often Hurgon would climb the high ridges at dusk and gaze eastward toward the distant shadow of Mordor. The Black Land had fallen silent long ago, yet something in him still watched, as if waiting for a sound he could no longer name. One such evening he was not alone. A boy of perhaps 12 years followed him up the slope, lean, bright-eyed, and unafraid. His name was Baranor, the son of one of Hurgon's old comrades, and he had been born in the peace that Shadow Claw's wrath had helped win. "Tell me again, Master Hurgon," the boy said as they reached the crest. "Tell me how the eagle flew through the fire and came back alive." Hurgon smiled faintly, resting his hands upon his staff. "You know the tale better than I, lad. You've made me speak it 100 times. "I know," Baranor said eagerly, "but I want to hear you tell it. I want to hear how his wings shone like iron and how he struck down the dark riders." The old ranger's gaze wandered to the horizon, where the setting sun bled across the mountains. "Aye," he said softly, "his wings did shine, not from light, but from the fire that clung to him when he rose from the mountain's heart. He was the fiercest creature I have ever known, and the truest. He fought not for glory, nor for command, but because evil had touched his world, and he would not suffer it to remain." Baranor listened wide-eyed, crouching at his side. "And you fought with him?" Hurgon laughed quietly. "I tried, but when he took to the skies, I could do little but watch. He was beyond us, beyond men, beyond fear itself." The wind stirred through the grass, carrying the scent of pine and river water. Far off, a hawk cried, and for an instant the old man's heart tightened, remembering another cry, vast, ringing, filled with fury and power. He closed his eyes, and in that moment it was as if the years between were nothing. "You think he still flies?" the boy asked suddenly. Hurgon opened his eyes again and his smile deepened. "Aye, I do. Not as we know it, perhaps. But some spirits are too great to fade. The wind remembers them. Baranor nodded solemnly, and for a long time they stood in silence. Then, as twilight deepened, they turned back toward the hall, where torches began to burn in the gathering dusk. That night, a storm came down from the mountains. Lightning danced over the peaks, and thunder rolled through the valleys. The people of Amon Arnon stayed within their homes, listening as the rain lashed against the shutters. But Hirgen stood upon his balcony, the storm's wind whipping his cloak, and lifted his face to the sky. And there, amid the storm, he saw it. For one heartbeat, framed by lightning, a great shadow crossed the heavens. Vast and regal, its wings spread wider than any mortal bird. Its cry rolled through the thunder, and though it might have been only the storm's echo, Hirgon's heart leapt as it had in his youth. He gripped the railing with trembling hands. "Fly, then," he whispered. "Fly, old friend." When morning came, the storm was gone. The air was clean and sharp, and the mountains shone like new-forged silver. But on the eastern ridge, the guards found something strange. A single feather lying upon the grass, black as night, but glinting with threads of gold. It was far too large to belong to any hawk or eagle of the south. They brought it to Hirgon, who took it in both hands and said nothing for a long time. Later, when Faramir heard of it, he came to see for himself. He stood beside Hirgon in the sunlight, gazing down at the feather resting upon the old man's palms. At last he said quietly, "The tales were true then." "They always were," Hirgon replied. "But truth changes little. He was not born for the peace that we now keep. His war was of another kind." Faramir nodded. "Still, we owe him more than songs. Let his name be remembered among the great protectors of Gondor." And so it was decreed that a stone be set upon the high hill above Amon Arnon. Upon it was carved the likeness of an eagle, wings spread wide, eyes turned toward the east. Beneath it were inscribed the words, "Shadow Claw, the deathly eagle defender of Ithilien, scourge of the shadow." Years rolled on, and the world changed again. The king returned to his throne in the White City, and peace spread across the lands of men. Children played among the ruins that once knew only battle, and the forests of Ithilien grew thick and green. Yet still the people would journey to that hill, to lay flowers or whisper thanks at the stone's base. And sometimes, though no man could say for certain, a great shadow would cross the sunlight swift and soundless. The wind would stir through the trees, carrying with it the faint echo of a cry, both fierce and sorrowful. Those who heard it would stand still, their hearts quickened, knowing the voice that once drove back the armies of darkness. In his last years, Hirgun would sit by his fire and tell the tale one final time, not as a tale of war, but as a memory of wonder. "Remember," he would tell the children who gathered about his chair, "that even the smallest of us may strike against the greatest darkness, but some spirits are born to stand above all others, and they do not vanish even when the world forgets. When he died, his body was laid beneath the stone of Shadow Claw, where the eagle carved in marble kept silent watch over the valley. And on the morning after his burial, a single feather drifted down from the high air and came to rest upon his grave, dark and shining, as though it had fallen from the wings of heaven itself. From that day onward, no storm ever broke upon the hills of Amon Arnon without first bringing the sound of distant wings. The farmers would pause their plows, the guards would lift their heads, and somewhere far above the clouds, a cry would echo, long, fierce, and free. Thus did the legend of Shadowclaw endure, not as a beast of blood and battle, but as a spirit of the wind, the last great eagle of Middle-earth, whose wings once carried vengeance and whose memory carried peace. And so long as the wind still swept across the mountains of the west, his shadow would never fade. The Fourth Age deepened, and Middle-earth settled into quiet. Yet even in peace, stories lingered like embers that refused to die. Along the riverbanks of Ithilien, where willows dipped their silver leaves into the flowing Anduin, men and women still spoke of the deathly eagle. His tale had become one of those half-remembered wonders that the young listened to wide-eyed, while the old smiled faintly and said that such things belonged to another age. But some knew better. One spring morning, long after Hirgon had been laid beneath the stone of Shadow Claw, a company of foresters working near the Efelduath came upon strange tracks in the soft earth of a glade. They were enormous, as if left by a creature too vast for the woods, deep impressions like the marks of talons. At first they thought them to be the work of rock slide or storm, but one among them, a gray-bearded man who had once served under the Rangers, looked long upon them and said quietly, "No rock made these." That night the forest seemed to stir. The men kept their fires low, uneasy. And though the wind was still, they heard faintly the rush of wings above the canopy, an ancient sound not of any bird known to Middle-earth. When dawn came, one tree stood stripped of bark and leaf, as if lightning had struck it clean, though no storm had passed. The men left that place in silence. None would cut wood there again. Rumors spread swiftly through the green vales. Travelers swore that a vast shape had crossed the moon, dark and gliding, its wings glimmering faintly as if edged with fire. Farmers in northern Ithilien found their flocks strangely undisturbed despite wolves roaming the hills, and said that sometimes in the dead of night a shadow fell over their fields and lingered, guarding. When the king heard these tidings, he sent messengers to Faramir in Emin Arnon, asking if such things could be. The prince of Ithilien answered only this: "If the wind remembers my lord, then so must we." In those days Faramir and Éowyn ruled wisely, and Ithilien flourished like no other land. Great gardens grew where battle had once raged, and the people called it the Garden of Gondor. Yet Faramir's heart often turned to the wild, for he had been a ranger before he was a prince, and his spirit had always found peace beneath open skies. One evening, as he walked alone upon the high terrace that faced Mordor, a shadow passed over the setting sun. He looked up and for an instant saw it, a black-winged shape, high and distant, cutting through the gold of the evening light. He stood long after it vanished, the wind stirring his hair, and when he returned to the hall he spoke not of what he had seen, but in his heart he knew. The eagle still flew, and so the years went by. Generations passed, kings rose and fell, and still the story of Shadowclaw was told, growing with each retelling. Children named their wooden toys after him, and hunters swore by his wings when they loosed their arrows. The people of Gondor said the eagle's spirit watched over the borders of the realm, keeping the air clear of all foul things. But even legends may sleep. For a long while no man saw the great eagle again. The mountains grew quiet and the forest forgot his shadow. Then came the winter of the Red Star. Far in the east, beyond the Sea of Rune, a fire appeared in the heavens, bright as a comet but slow-moving, lingering in the night sky. Many took it for an omen. Strange tremors shook the ground, and the beasts of the wild grew restless. In Ithilien, the birds fled south by the thousands, and the horses stamped and whinnied, though no storm approached. On the coldest night of that winter, a messenger rode hard from the north to Minas Tirith, bringing word that a black wind had risen in the mountains, a wind that carried with it a stench of decay and a sound like distant wailing. Whole valleys had been emptied of sound, as if the world itself held its breath. In Eamon Arnon, Faramir stood upon his balcony and watched the strange star burn red above the peaks. "Old evils stir," he said softly to Éowyn beside him, "and if the world must wake again to shadow, perhaps the sky will answer as it once did." She laid a hand upon his arm. "You think he will return?" Faramir looked eastward toward the dark line of the Ephel Duath. "I do not think," he said. "I hope." That night none in Ithilien slept. The wind howled from the mountains and the trees bent beneath it. The moon vanished behind thick, roiling clouds. And then a cry. It came from the highest reaches of the sky, deep and vast. A sound that shook the leaves from the trees. The cry of an eagle, but not of any living breed. It was older, stronger, as if it had been waiting an age to be heard again. The clouds split asunder, and through them a dark shape descended, outlined by lightning, wings vast as sails, eyes burning gold. Shadowclaw had returned. He came not in peace, but in fury. For from the east, borne upon that black wind, came creatures twisted by shadow, remnants of the Dark Lord's forgotten armies. They crawled through the mountains like vermin, pale and venomous, their eyes glimmering faintly with the malice of ages past. They sought the borders of Gondor once more, and would have poured into Ithilien unchecked, had not the eagle come first. He struck like a storm, unleashed. The very air trembled beneath his wings. With each dive, claws of iron tore through ranks of creatures that had not seen the sun since the fall of their master. His cry scattered them as leaves before fire. The people of Ithilien looked up from their walls and saw flashes of lightning as he fought among the peaks, his silhouette blazing against the storm. The battle raged through the night. When dawn came, the clouds were torn, and the red star had faded, leaving the sky clear and cold. The mountains were silent again, too silent. Searchers found the remains of the shadow creatures, scattered among the stones, but no sign of the eagle save a single black feather, lodged in a crevice of rock, glinting faintly gold in the morning sun. Faramir took it in his hands and bowed his head. "He has kept his vigil," he said, "and the land is safe again." Éowyn placed the feather within a silver casket and laid it beside the carved stone that bore the eagle's likeness. "Then let this stand as proof," she said, "that the wind remembers still." And so peace returned once more. The red star vanished from the sky, and the mountains grew quiet again. Yet in the years that followed, the people of Ithilien would look often toward the east when storms gathered, half expecting to see a shadow riding the lightning, a reminder that not all guardians sleep forever. And sometimes when the wind turned cold and swift, carrying with it the scent of high places and storm, the old would whisper to the young, "Listen, he flies again. For though ages may pass and kingdoms may fall, the sky holds memory longer than stone. And as long as the wind moves through the mountains of Middle-earth, the spirit of Shadowclaw will soar upon it, unseen, eternal, and deathly still." When the mists of early spring drifted once more across the vales of Ithilien, the land seemed to breathe in peace. The wars were long over, the last scars of fire healed beneath green grass and blooming white flowers. Yet the people had not forgotten. For all their joy, a quiet reverence lingered in their hearts, a memory of wings that had once split the sky, of a cry that had shaken the courage back into the hearts of men. At the hill of Emin Arnon, where the stone of Shadowclaw stood, pilgrims came from far and wide. They brought small offerings, feathers of ordinary hawks, carved eagles in wood and bronze, and scraps of parchment bearing names of loved ones lost to darkness. They believed that the deathly eagle carried the spirits of the brave to their rest beyond the circles of the world, and that his shadow still guarded the land from above. The priests of the king spoke no doctrine of this. The Valar were distant, and the servants of Ilúvatar seldom meddled in the affairs of men. Yet none could deny that when the storms rolled in from the sea and thunder walked the mountains, the wind that roared through the forests of Ithilien bore a sound that was not wholly of this world. The folk would lift their faces to the rain and whisper, "He flies tonight." It was during one such storm that another tale began, one that would be told for generations afterward. In the border village of Shellendor, not far from the Henneth Annan, there lived a young woman named Aranis. Her father had been a ranger in Faramir's service, but he had fallen years before her birth. All her life she had grown up hearing stories of the deathly eagle, the avenger who had torn through the armies of Mordor, who had defied the Nazgûl, and whose wings had sheltered Ithilien from ruin. She loved that tale beyond all others, though she had never thought it more than legend. One evening, as the storm gathered over the mountains, she stood at the edge of the forest, listening to the distant rumble of thunder. The sky glowed with strange, silver-green light, and the air trembled as if holding its breath. She thought she heard far away the echo of something vast, an unearthly cry that sent the birds scattering from the trees. Her heart leapt. Against all reason she knew that sound. Suddenly from the darkening sky there came a flash, not of lightning but of movement. A shadow swept over her so great that for an instant the ground dimmed beneath it. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the rain, and saw, just for a heartbeat, the outline of wings black as midnight, glimmering faintly where the storm light caught their edges. It was gone as swiftly as it had come, vanishing into the clouds. The people of the village spoke of it for days afterward. Some said it was an omen of war, others a sign of blessing. But in Aranis's heart, awe and longing stirred in equal measure. She could not sleep that night for the sound of wind in the eaves, and when morning came, she made a choice that would alter the course of her life. She left the village with only a bow, a small pack, and her father's old ranger cloak. She would follow the shadow that had passed over her and seek the truth of it. For if the deathly eagle yet lived, she wished to see him with her own eyes, and to thank him for her father, for Ithilien, for the peace he had bought with blood and fire. For many days she journeyed eastward through the green woods and up into the foothills of the mountains. The land grew wilder as she went. Great crags jutted from the earth, and the trees gave way to rock and mist. By the third day, snow began to fall. Light at first, then thick and blinding. But still she pressed on, driven by a strange certainty that her path was not her own. On the fourth night she found herself in a narrow pass, hemmed by walls of black stone. The wind shrieked through the cleft, and somewhere above she heard again that deep, rumbling cry, the same sound that had haunted her dreams. It rolled down the mountain like thunder breaking. Aranis lifted her torch, though the flame guttered in the gale. "Shadowclaw," she called into the darkness, "if you are still among the living, show yourself. I come not as an enemy." Her words were swallowed by the wind. For a moment she thought she had been a fool, chasing phantoms, but then the snow ceased to fall. The air itself seemed to still, and from the shadows at the edge of the cliffs, a shape began to take form. 2 eyes glowed in the gloom, golden, ancient, and filled with something that was neither wrath nor mercy. The torchlight glinted on black feathers, vast and gleaming with a dull sheen like forged steel. The creature stepped forward, talons scraping the rock. Aranis fell to her knees, her breath stolen. The eagle was larger than any being she'd ever imagined, its wings furled close against its body, yet spanning more than the breadth of a hall. One of those wings bore a long, pale scar, a mark left by battle long ago. His head bowed slightly as he regarded her. "You live," she whispered, her voice trembling. "By the valor, you live." The eagle's gaze did not waver. Then slowly he spread his wings. The wind rose around them, swirling snow into spirals of light. Aranis felt her heart fill with a fierce joy mingled with sorrow, for she knew she stood before something beyond mortal ken. He moved at last, turning toward the east, and with a single beat of those mighty wings, he rose into the storm. The wind struck her like a wave as he climbed into the clouds until he was only a black silhouette against the lightning. Aranis wept, though she could not say why. She knew she had been granted a sight no mortal of her age had ever seen. When at last she descended from the mountains, she carried in her hand a single feather, torn loose by the storm, black as night, and faintly warm to the touch. Years later, when she was old and her hair had turned white, Aranis would tell her grandchildren of that meeting. "He was not dead," she would say softly by the hearth fire. "He cannot die, not truly. So long as the wind stirs the high mountains and evil dares to creep again from the east, he will rise. He was born of the sky, and the sky will not forsake him." And on nights when the storms rolled over Ithilien and thunder broke across the hills, the children would run to the windows and listen. Sometimes, through the rain, they swore. They heard a cry echoing faint and far, vast as the mountains themselves. Then they would whisper his name in wonder, Shadowclaw, the deathly eagle. For though his wings might never again darken the fields of men, his spirit yet rode the winds that shaped their fate, unseen but ever near. And in that knowledge, the people of Ithilien slept without fear, knowing that somewhere above the clouds, the last guardian of the skies still watched. The years turned to centuries, and the world of men spread far and wide across Middle-earth. Kingdoms flourished upon lands once scorched by war, and the name of Sauron faded into dust, remembered only in the songs of lore masters and the whispers of ancient trees. The shadow that had once devoured the sky was gone, yet even in peace the wind never forgot. For the wind is old beyond reckoning, and in its voice lie memories too deep for mortal ears to hear. It carried with it a faint echo still, a cry that had once shattered the silence of Mordor, a cry that had rung across the plains of Gorgoroth when the world itself trembled. And though few now knew the name of the creature who had uttered it, the mountains remembered and the rivers sang softly of his flight. In the high halls of Minas Tirith, where white banners fluttered like wings against the morning, a scholar named Eldarion sat among scrolls and maps. He was a man of quiet thought, descended from the stewards of old, and his heart belonged to the days long past. His peers studied trade or law or the stars that guided ships, but Eldarion sought the forgotten tales of the Third Age. For years he had gathered fragments, letters of rangers, carvings from ruined towers, songs sung in half-remembered tongues. Yet among them all, one story haunted him, the legend of the Deathly Eagle. He had read the accounts of the War of the Ring, and of the eagles that had borne the ring-bearers from the fire. But this tale was different. It spoke of an eagle black as midnight, whose wings had burned with the wrath of the West, who had fought, not beside the captains of men, but above them, waging his own war against the hosts of the shadow. Most dismissed it as myth. A tale to hearten soldiers, they told him, a dream of the wild. But Eldarion could not rest. There was something in those old words, a truth that called to him. One winter morning, he set out from Minas Tirith, leaving the white city gleaming in the snow. His road took him east, through the green fields that had once been Pelennor, then across the Anduin to Ithilien, now a land of orchards and golden trees. He rode alone, for his purpose was one of seeking, not conquest. The people he met along the way were kind, but when he asked of the eagle, they only smiled wistfully. "Yes," said an old farmer in the hills. "My grandmother used to say he watched over this valley. When the storms come, you can hear him crying in the wind." Another, a hunter, laughed softly as he strung his bow. "The Deathly Eagle? Aye, I've heard that name. But if he ever lived, he's long gone now. The mountains keep their secrets." Still, Eldarion pressed on. He followed the trails north toward Eamon Arnon, where the old stones of Shadowclaw's monument still stood. Moss covered its carvings, but the eagle's eyes, chiseled in marble, still seemed to gaze eastward toward the black peaks of Mordor. There, beneath the shadow of the monument, Eldarion knelt. The wind stirred his hair, and he thought he heard a whisper in it, a voice so faint it could have been memory itself. "Seek the sky where fire once fell," it seemed to say. He lifted his gaze toward the horizon. Beyond the veil of distance, the Efelduath loomed, stark and gray. Few dared to climb those heights. The land there was treacherous, broken by canyons and old scars of war. But Eldarion's heart was set. He gathered his gear and rode toward the mountains. Days later he reached the foothills, where the paths of men ended and the wild began. Snow dusted the rocks, and the air grew thin and sharp. The silence was deep, broken only by the sigh of the wind. He camped beneath a stone arch, left by some forgotten ruin, and as night fell, the stars came alive in the black sky. He dreamed then, a dream so vivid he could feel its breath. He stood upon the cliffs above Gorgoroth. The land below burned, rivers of molten fire twisting through ash. And there, in the heart of the storm, an eagle soared, vast beyond comprehension, his feathers trailing smoke and flame. His cry rolled through the heavens, and with each beat of his wings the darkness retreated. Eldarion felt the wind rush past him, fierce and alive. Then the eagle turned his gaze upon him, eyes bright as suns, fierce and sorrowful, all at once. "Why do you seek me, son of the West?" the voice asked, though the beak did not move. "I seek truth," Eldarion replied, though his words trembled. "There is no truth in legend," said the eagle, "only memory, and memory fades." "But the world remembers you," Eldarion said. "Your name endures." The eagle tilted his head. "Names endure, perhaps, but names are only wind. The wind carries all things, even the cries of the fallen. Do you seek the one who was, or the shadow he left behind? Before Eldarion could answer, the dream broke. He awoke before dawn, his heart pounding. The fire had gone cold, yet the air was warm, the faint scent of ozone hanging in it, like the aftermath of lightning. He looked upward and saw for just an instant a dark shape wheeling across the stars. He leapt to his feet, calling out, but the sound was swallowed by the wind. Only a single feather drifted down, landing at his feet. It was black as night, yet glimmered faintly gold when he held it to the light. Eldarion never returned to Minas Tirith. Some said he lost his way in the mountains, that the snows took him. Others whispered that he had found what he sought and followed it beyond mortal reach. But in the spring that followed, shepherds in Ithilien told of strange winds that swept down from the peaks. Warm winds that carried the scent of thunder and the distant cry of eagles. Travelers crossing the Anduin at dusk claimed they saw a dark shape gliding high above the clouds, and when it passed, the air grew still as though the world itself bowed in silence. And so, once more, the tale of Shadowclaw stirred. Scholars in the city scoffed, but the common folk began to speak his name again in quiet awe. To them, it mattered little whether the eagle was flesh or spirit. He had become something greater, a guardian of the skies, a reminder that even when evil is vanquished, vigilance must never sleep. In time, the feather Eldarion had found was brought to the White Tower. It was placed within a glass case beside the ancient banners of the West. Those who looked upon it said it seemed to move ever so slightly, as if stirred by an unseen wind. And when storms swept over Gondor, shaking the citadel and darkening the sky, the feather would glimmer faintly, gold within the gloom. Then the watchmen upon the walls would lift their eyes to the heights, and though the clouds hid all things, they would whisper, "He flies again." For in the hearts of men the wind's voice never lies, and as long as the wind of Middle-earth moves over the mountains and the plains, the cry of Shadowclaw, the deathly eagle, will ride upon it fierce and unforgotten. In the twilight of the Fourth Age, when the light of Numenor's blood still glimmered faintly in the veins of men, the world began to change. The lands grew quieter, the seas widened between the realms of the West and the fading East. Elves had long departed across the sea, and dwarves delved deeper beneath the mountains, seeking solace in the heart of stone. Yet for all the shifting of ages, the wind still wandered freely, carrying whispers of things that once were, and of one whose wings had shadowed the sky. In the year when the white tree of Gondor flowered for the 100th time, a great storm gathered over the Efelduath. The peaks that had slept for centuries awoke with thunder. The people of Ithilien looked up from their gardens and saw the mountain crowns wreathed in fireless lightning. It was said that in those days, when the sky turned black as ash and the rivers of rain descended in torrents, the storm bore the memory of something ancient, a reckoning long delayed. In the court of Aemon Arnon dwelt the Lady Mirren, daughter of Faramir's line. She was wise and strong of heart, a keeper of records and tales, and her soul was restless with the curiosity of her kin. She had studied the scrolls that spoke of Shadowclaw, the deathly eagle, and she had read the journals of Eldarion the scholar, who had vanished into the mountains seeking him, yet all her learning brought her no peace. For she, too, had heard the strange cries upon the wind, that none could explain. One night, as the storm's first rumblings rolled across the hills, Mirren left the safety of the hall and climbed to the tower that crowned her father's house. The air crackled with power. Clouds like iron walls marched over the moon. She looked eastward where the dark mountains stood like a line of sentinels, and her heart trembled, for there, flashing in the stormlight, she saw a vast shadow moving between the peaks, swift, soundless, immense. The cry that followed shook the very stones beneath her feet. It was the cry she had read of 100 times in the old records, the cry that had split the night when Mordor fell. And hearing it, she knew with certainty that the deathly eagle lived still, bound to the skies of the east as guardian, or perhaps as judge, of the world that had forgotten him. But that night did not pass quietly. From the mountains came strange lights, red and cold like the glow of embers beneath the snow. Travelers who rode north spoke of dark figures moving through the passes, too swift for men, too pale for beasts. Some swore the old evils were stirring again, born of the remnants of Sauron's malice that even fire could not cleanse. Fear began to creep back into the hearts of the simple folk. They whispered that something ancient had been roused by the storm, something that even kings could not command. Mirren sent riders to the borders, but none returned. And when the third night of thunder came, she could bear the waiting no longer. She gathered her father's sword and her mother's cloak, and though the counselors begged her to remain, she left at dawn, riding alone toward the shadowed peaks. Her horse carried her swiftly across the plains, where the grass bowed low before the wind. When she reached the foothills, she dismounted and climbed on foot. The path was steep, winding through gullies and ravines, where old bones of war still lay half buried beneath moss. The storm had passed, but the air remained heavy, thick with the scent of rain and earth. It was near dusk when she came upon a ruin, an ancient outpost of stone, its walls broken and its tower half fallen. She made her camp within and waited, her eyes fixed upon the eastern horizon. The wind moaned through the cracks, carrying with it faint echoes that were not of the living. Then at the edge of night she saw movement among the clouds. A black shape descended, vast and terrible, and the wind surged as though the world itself had drawn breath. She rose to her feet, her heart pounding. The eagle's wings filled the sky, stretching from mountain to mountain, and his feathers gleamed with a faint fire of lightning. He circled once above her, then alighted upon the broken tower with a sound like thunder. The stones groaned beneath his weight. His eyes burned gold, bright as the setting sun, and his gaze fell upon her. "You are of Faramir's line," said a voice, not spoken but carried upon the wind itself, deep and resonant, echoing in her mind. "Why do you seek me, child of men?" Mirren bowed her head, her cloak whipping around her. "I seek no glory," she said, "only to know if you yet guard these lands as you once did, when darkness covered all." For a long time the eagle was silent, the wind stilled, the air heavy with the weight of his gaze. "I have watched," said the voice at last. "Long have I flown above these mountains. The fire that once burned in the east has faded, yet its ashes still breathe. You know it. The hearts of men grow proud again. They build, they conquer, and they forget. The wind carries their songs, but not their wisdom." Mirren lifted her eyes. "Then teach us again. Show us what was lost." The eagle spread his wings, and the tower shuddered beneath him. "I am no teacher," he said. "I am the storm that follows folly I am the cry that wakes the sleepers. When the darkness stirs again, I shall rise, but it is not my place to guide those who have turned from memory. Lightning flared behind him, and for an instant his wings blazed white. Mirren fell to her knees, shielding her eyes. Yet you came, she said through the roar of wind. You came when we needed you. You came when the world was dying. And so I shall again, said the eagle. When the last light falters and the earth trembles beneath the weight of its own pride, I will return. The wind remembers all things, and so long as the wind endures, I endure. With that, he leapt from the tower. The storm broke anew, tearing the sky open. His cry rolled across the mountains like a wave of thunder, fierce and mournful all at once. Then he was gone, vanishing into the clouds as swiftly as he had come. Mirren remained kneeling, the sound of his flight echoing through her bones. When the storm finally passed, she found a single feather lying among the stones, black as shadow, veined faintly with silver. She carried it back to Emin Arnon and laid it upon the old monument beneath the carved likeness of the deathly eagle. That night the wind swept down from the mountains, gentle and steady. It moved through the halls, through the trees, and through the hearts of those who slept, whispering a promise older than time that the guardian of the sky still watched, patient and unbroken, and those centuries would yet pass, and the names of kings would fade. The people of Ithilien would remember that vow. They would say when the winds howled across the land and the storms gathered in the east, that Shadowclaw had spread his wings again, keeping his eternal vigil above the world he once saved. The years flowed onward like a river, swift, endless, gleaming with both shadow and light. The lands of men grew vast and full of life. Great ships sailed from the harbors of Dol Amroth to far southern shores, where strange peoples dwelt. Towers rose upon the plains of Rohan, and the old roads of Gondor became white ribbons winding through golden fields. The age of peace had endured beyond the memory of any living man. Yet peace, though bright, is fragile as a glass vessel. All it takes is a whisper from the wind, and cracks begin to form. In the high mountains of the east, where the stones were older than kings and the snow never melted, storms began to gather once more. The shepherds of Ithilien were the first to notice. They spoke of strange sounds upon the wind, like drums far off in the clouds, and of flickering fires deep within the mountain passes. Travelers vanished in those days, and though their bodies were never found, their voices were sometimes heard in dreams, crying for aid from the heights. The wise grew uneasy. From Minas Tirith, the lords of the realm sent scouts to the borders, but none could reach the highest passes. The air there grew foul and heavy, thick with the reek of sulfur and smoke. Some said that old fires, buried deep beneath the earth since the fall of Mordor, were stirring again. Others whispered darker things, that the remnants of ancient malice, broken but not destroyed, had begun to wake. In the Hall of Kings, the council met beneath the marble dome. Among them sat Lady Mirren of Ithilien, older now, her hair streaked with silver, but her spirit unbent. She listened as the captains argued, each fearful of what the signs might mean. At last she rose and said, "If the sky trembles and the wind cries in warning, then we should listen, for the wind remembers what we forget." Her words silenced the hall, for though many laughed in secret at the old songs, None could deny that every child in Gondor still grew up knowing the name of the deathly eagle, and none could forget the storm she had witnessed in her youth, when the mountains themselves had answered his cry. It was decided that a company should ride to the border of the east to seek the truth of these strange signs. Lady Mirren would go with them, for her heart, restless as the wind itself, could not remain behind. They rode for 7 days beneath gathering clouds. The air grew colder, the nights longer, until the moon itself seemed veiled by smoke. By the 8th day they reached the high ridges above the Efelduath, where no man had trod since the fall of Sauron. There they made camp beside the ruins of an old fortress, half buried in snow. That night, as her men slept, Mirren kept watch by the dying fire. The wind moaned through the crags, and from the depths of the mountains came a distant rhythmic sound, too slow for thunder, too deep for stone. It was as though the earth itself were breathing. She rose quietly, wrapping her cloak around her, and stepped into the cold. The stars were hidden, yet faint flashes of light pulsed within the clouds above, blue and crimson, as if fire and storm danced together. Then she saw it, a shadow gliding through the mist, vast and swift. Her heart leapt, for she knew that shape. The wings spread wide across the darkness, and the wind changed, sweeping down the valley in a roar that scattered snow from the cliffs. The eagle descended, his feathers shimmering faintly with starlight, his eyes, golden as molten dawn, fixed upon her. "Lady of Ithilien," came the voice carried on the storm. "You have come again to seek what should not be sought." Mirren bowed her head. "I came because the land grows restless, and the hearts of men forget too quickly. You warned us once that folly brings the storm. Tell me, does it rise again?" The eagle's gaze turned toward the east. Beyond the mountains, a dull red glow pulsed against the horizon. "Yes," he said. "The ashes breathe once more. A new fire is kindled by those who would remember the darkness as power, not ruin, but they are not yet strong." "Then we can stop them," Mirren said eagerly. He looked down at her, the wind swirling between them. "Men cannot stop what they do not understand. You wield sword and flame, but the shadow that rises now is born of memory and pride, the same pride that felled kings of old, the same that doomed Numenor." Mirren's eyes filled with tears. "Then what hope is there?" The eagle's wings lifted slightly, a slow and solemn motion. "There's always hope while the wind endures, for the wind remembers, and so long as one heart remains true, the shadow cannot master the sky." A rumble of thunder rolled through the peaks. From the eastern pass, the red glow brightened. Then came the shriek, a sound neither beast nor wind, terrible and piercing. Shapes rose within the smoke, creatures of wing and claw, their bodies twisted by flame, remnants of the fell beasts of old, reawakened by the corruption that still lingered in the deep places. Mirren staggered back, drawing her sword, though its blade looked small against the storm. "What are they?" "Echoes," said the eagle, "reflections of what once was." His eyes burned brighter. "And so they must be met by what endures." He leapt from the ground, and the world seemed to shake. The wind roared beneath his wings, and lightning split the clouds as he climbed into the dark. The monstrous shapes wheeled to meet him, shrieking, but he struck first, talons gleaming, wings aflame with storm light. The sky became a war of shadow and fire. Mirren fell to her knees, shielding her face from the wind that tore at the mountains. She glimpsed the battle only in flashes, The sweep of a great wing, the burst of flame, the cry that split the heavens. The creatures fell one by one, broken upon the rocks, until only silence remained. At last, the eagle descended once more. Smoke curled from his feathers, and his breath came in great, shuddering sighs. He alighted upon a cliff above her, the storm dying around them. "It is done," he said softly, "but remember, daughter of men, the sky will always answer the earth's call. As long as pride and greed awaken below, the storm must rise to meet it. I am no longer of flesh and feather alone. I am the memory of wrath, the voice of the wind, and I shall not fade while the world forgets." Mirren looked up through her tears. "Then you will never rest?" The eagle turned his gaze towards the dawning east. "Rest comes only when the wind falls silent, and the wind never sleeps." With that, he spread his wings. The first light of morning broke over the peaks, catching upon his feathers until they gleamed like gold and silver mixed. For one heartbeat, the whole sky seemed alive with light. Then he soared upward, climbing higher and higher until he vanished into the sun. Mirren returned to Ithilien with her company, bearing tidings of the battle. Few believed her tale, though those who looked into her eyes felt a hush fall over them, for she carried within her gaze the reflection of something vast. In the years that followed, no shadow ever again troubled the mountains, and when she died, her people buried her beside the stone of Shadowclaw. They say that on that night a great wind swept down from the east, stirring the trees and bending the grass as though unseen wings passed overhead. The wind lingered until dawn, and in its voice, faint and clear, was heard a cry that rolled across the hills, mournful and proud, a farewell and a promise, all in one. And thus the tale of Shadowclaw came to its end. Not in darkness, but in the endless breath of the wind, where memory and hope are one. The deathly eagle, born of wrath, had become the guardian of peace, the eternal watcher in the skies of Middle-earth.